All right, let's talk about Minnesota. You might think you know it for its lakes and cold winters, but its story is way deeper and more complex than you might imagine. We're going to trace its journey all the way from ancient lands to a global hub of innovation. So, what's the common thread here? You guessed it. It's Minnesota. And today, we're going to connect these seemingly random dots. It's a wild story, really, a mix of ancient history, some really intense conflict, and progress that literally changed the world. All right, first up, ancient lands and first peoples. To get the full picture of Minnesota, you gotta go way, way back, long before it was even called Minnesota. And when I say deep, I mean deep. The human story here goes back for thousands of years. We're talking about remains like Brown's Valley Man from 9,000 years ago, petroglyphs carved 5,000 years back, even burial mounds that started popping up almost 3,000 years ago. This land has been inhabited for a very, very long time. You know, even the name of the state itself comes from this deep history. Minnesota isn't just some random name. It's from the Dakota phrase Mni Soda Makose. And how beautiful is this? It means land where the waters reflect the clouds. It's right there in the name. So for centuries, this was a busy, populated place. The Dakota were the main group here when Europeans first showed up. But then, around the 1700s, the Ojibwa, or Anishinaabe, started moving in from the east. This really shook things up and created a whole new dynamic, especially once the fur trade got going. Okay, next chapter, a new frontier. The arrival of Europeans, starting with French fur traders in the 1600s, was a total game changer. This is where things start to look a bit more like the Minnesota on the map today. And you can see how quickly things moved. It went from first contact with traders to the U.S. military setting up shop. And the real linchpin here, Fort Snelling. It was built right where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers meet, and that fort became the foothold for everything that came next, including the official Minnesota Territory in 1849. Now, it's super important to get this. The first Europeans weren't here for land. They were here for business. The fur trade was everything. It drove the entire economy, it shifted alliances between tribes, and it plugged this pretty remote region into the global economy for the very first time. And this is just fascinating. You can literally trace the birth of the Twin Cities right back to Fort Snelling. Here's how it went down. The fort needed lumber, so sawmills popped up at St. Anthony Falls. That settlement became Minneapolis. Meanwhile, squatters who got kicked off the fort's land moved downstream and started their own settlement. And boom, that became St. Paul. It's crazy to think both cities started from that one spot. All right, on to statehood and its growing pains. Becoming a state was anything but smooth. Minnesota joins the U.S. in 1858, but this moment of celebration was almost immediately thrown into chaos by war. Not one, but two. I mean, look at this timeline. Things were turbulent. The politics were so divided that they actually drafted two different state constitutions, one for each party. Then, just a few years after becoming a state, they're thrown into the Civil War. And as if that wasn't enough, a brutal war breaks out right there at home. So get this story. When the Civil War starts, the governor of Minnesota, Alexander Ramsey, just happens to be in Washington, D.C. He hears the news and doesn't even hesitate. He marches right over and pledges Minnesota troops to Abraham Lincoln, making Minnesota the very first state to volunteer for the Union. What a moment. And that commitment, wow, it had a massive cost. That number, 82%, is just staggering. It's the casualty rate for the 1st Minnesota Regiment at Gettysburg. They were ordered to make what was basically a suicide charge to buy the Union Army a few crucial minutes. They did it, they saved the day, but they were nearly wiped out. It's one of the most heroic and devastating charges in American history. But this is where the story gets incredibly complicated and tragic. While Minnesota's soldiers are off fighting heroically at places like Gettysburg, a whole different war is exploding back home. The Dakota War of 1862 kicks off, fueled by broken promises, delayed payments, and literal starvation. So you have this insane situation where the state is fighting for the Union far away while also being at war with itself. And the end of that war, it's just grim, 38. That's the number of Dakota men who were hanged in Mankato on a single day, December 26, 1862. To this day, it is the largest mass execution in U.S. history. It's an incredibly painful chapter that left scars that are still felt today.
Okay, so after all that conflict, Minnesota enters a new phase. It becomes an industrial juggernaut. The state basically takes its massive natural resources and uses them to build an economic powerhouse that helps fuel the entire country's growth.
And things just took off. You see key pieces fall into place, like James J. Hill's Stone Arch Bridge, which was huge for the railroads. Then they discover iron ore. Tons of it. A whole new industry just springs up overnight in the northern part of the state. And that iron is what built the skyscrapers and factories of industrial America.
So Minnesota's economy was really built on three things, three massive pillars. Logging, thanks to the endless white pine forests, flour milling, with Minneapolis becoming the milling capital of the world, and iron mining. Those three industries, all pulled straight from the land, made the state an absolute powerhouse.
So how did Minneapolis become the milling capital of the world? It all came down to tech. They had this tough spring wheat that was hard to mill, but then they invented two game changers. The Middlings Purifier, which was this cool machine that used jets of air to separate the good stuff from the husk, and roller mills, which were way better than old-fashioned grindstones. Together, this tech let them make this amazing, pure white flour that no one else could match. It was a total revolution. And that brings us to the modern era. In the 20th century, there's another huge shift. Minnesota's economy starts moving away from just pulling stuff out of the ground and toward creating things with brainpower, technology, innovation, and big ideas. And this period has been just as eventful as any other. You've got major political figures like Hubert Humphreys stepping onto the national stage. You've got the world's first supercomputer being built here. But you also have modern tragedies and events that have put Minnesota at the very center of the national conversation about justice. And there's no better example of this new focus on innovation than the Mayo Clinic. They came up with this idea that sounds normal now, but was revolutionary then, the integrated group practice. Basically, instead of you going from doctor to doctor, the doctors came to you as a team. This idea completely transformed patient care and made the Mayo Clinic a global name in medicine. But it wasn't just medicine. Minnesota, believe it or not, became a hotbed for the computer industry. We're talking about companies like Control Data and especially Cray Research. The guy behind it, Seymour Cray, is a legend. He basically invented the supercomputer. You add in giants like IBM, Honeywell, and Medtronic, which started in a garage and is now a huge medical device company, and you see how Minnesota became a real tech hub. The state also started punching way above its weight in national politics, and a huge part of that was Hubert Humphrey. This guy went from being the mayor of Minneapolis all the way to vice president of the United States. And he was a massive force for civil rights, playing a central role in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a truly huge achievement. Then, in 2020, Minneapolis was once again at the center of American history for a deeply tragic reason. The murder of George Floyd, captured on video for the whole world to see, ignited global protests. It put the city and the state right at the epicenter of a massive, painful, and necessary reckoning on race and justice in America. So, you see, Minnesota's story is this incredible mix of progress and conflict, of amazing achievements and really deep, persistent challenges. And that leaves us with one big question, right? A state that was innovative enough to create the supercomputer and revolutionize medicine, can it use that same spirit to tackle the tough social problems that have been part of its story from the very beginning? Hey, if you found this deep dive interesting, we've got a whole playlist of U.S. state histories you should definitely check out. And of course, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries so you don't miss our next one. Thanks so much for watching.